But very pleased to say the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, joins us once again in the studio. Mr Harper, lovely to see you this morning. Please don't take this question the wrong way, but with trains not running across most of the country, as Transport Secretary, do you accept that you have failed in your job?
No, I don't. I have two roles here. One is to keep the railway industry working, but also I've got to be fair to the taxpayer. There isn't a bottomless pit of money to go into the rail industry. And I think if most people listening to your show look at the offer that's on the table, they'll think it's very fair and reasonable. It's in line with what most people in the private sector are getting. We've seen Unite workers at Network Rail have accepted the offer. The TSSA are recommending that offer be accepted by their members. And even with the RMT's very strong recommendation to their members to not accept the offer, to turn it down, to reject it out of hand, we still saw nearly 40% of RMT members wanting to accept it. So I think the tide is turning on opinion about whether these offers are reasonable or not, and therefore I hope the union will look at it again, call off the strikes and accept what is a reasonable pay offer.
But just in terms of the RMT, from their perspective, it isn't just about pay, it is about T's and C's. Did you or did you not instruct the Rail Delivery Group to insert clauses into the offer document regarding driver-only operation, trains without guards on them?
No, reform of the rail industry has been on the table from the very beginning. And
so can you just answer that question? Did you direct the Rail Recovery Group to put in driver-only operation into the document, into the offer document?
The detailed negotiations between the employers and the trade unions are between them. The overall amount of money available obviously is something that I have to set. So the detail is up to them. The driver-only trains are not a new thing. They've been running since the 1980s. And over half
have been opposed by every single union representing rail workers since time immemorial. If that is not a wrecking amendment, I don't know what is.
Well, over half of passengers that go on the railways are on trains where driver-only operation is in place, and it's been accepted by train drivers. So it's actually not... I want a deal here. That's why when I met the unions, I made sure there was an improved offer from Network Rail, an improved offer, and an offer came from the train operating companies that hadn't previously been on the table. That's what Mick Lynch asked me when I met him, and that's what I delivered. It's a reasonable offer for reform and pay, and I think the union should accept it.
You genuinely believed that the RMT would accept an offer containing driver-only operations, something that they have consistently approved. I mean, Mick Lynch said this. We went on Sunday to have the conversation, fully expecting the blanks to be filled in on pay. The Rail Delivery Group said, we can't do what we said. The Department for Transport have made us put driver-only operation into this document. And it strikes me that it looks very much like you're happy for these strikes to go ahead. You inserted something that you knew the RMT could not and would not accept.
No, look, quite the reverse. I don't want these strikes to take place at all. They're bad for passengers. They're bad for businesses, like, for example, the hospitality industry, which is going to suffer or is suffering as a result. And they're not good for the rail industry going forward. I want the strikes to be resolved. That's why I made sure there was an improved offer on the table, and I think some of the trade unions have accepted it. You know, you say about people not accepting it, that one of the trade unions is recommending acceptance. Unite Workers accepted it yesterday, and I think the RMT should think again. There's a reasonable offer on the table. Reform needs to take place. Reform has been on the table.
Is he lying? Is he lying when he said that he went in on Sunday and the Rail Delivery Group were instructed by the DfT to put in driver-only operation? Look, is he lying or not?
I haven't been involved in the detailed negotiations between the train operating companies and the trade unions. That's for them to deal with. I haven't been doing that. I made sure there was an offer on the table which I think should be accepted, and reform of how the railways operate, you know, 7-day working, all of the other things, it's been on the table from the very beginning.
I suppose at least the RMT should be appreciative of the fact that you yourself are willing to discuss pay with them in a way in which you know, the nurses' unions are not being talked to about pay. Why does Steve Barclay, why does the Health Secretary believe that he doesn't have to address the reason that nurses are going out on strike in negotiations with nurses?
Well, look, first of all, I don't think there's a difference here. I've been very clear. It's not my job to negotiate in the same way the Health Secretary is not negotiating. But meeting with trade unions and listening to them, I think, is very reasonable.
Why is he not talking about pay? That is the reason that nurses are going out on strike. They have a meeting, he doesn't discuss pay, the nurses go out on strike.
He's listening to their concerns, but on pay specifically, you know we've got for the health service an independent pay review body that's made a series of recommendations for people who work in the health service, including nurses who we value.
Absolutely.
We've accepted all of their recommendations in full. The 19% pay rise that the nurses are asking for isn't affordable, and I don't think it's reasonable, and it would take money away from frontline health.
But you don't have to stick to what the independent pay review body suggests, do you? You could add to it. So when we have the General Secretary suggesting that not a single brown penny more was offered, you could well have done so had you desired to do so. Isn't that the case?
Well, look, I think we've got to also look into account what is affordable. And we've got to, what they are asking for would cost £10 billion. That money would come away from frontline healthcare. So it's about giving a fair pay rise. And, for example, we value nurses. So last year, when there was a pay freeze in the wider public sector, we made sure that nurses got a pay rise. There were the only people to do so because we valued them. We've made a reasonable payoff for this year, which the pay review bodies have recommended. That gives a £1,400 pay rise to nurses, which means for the lowest paid nurses, they're actually getting a rise of 9%.
Is it fair that nurses' starting salaries have risen less quickly than an MP's salary? And since 2010, MP salaries have risen by 28%. You know, and you will accept, that nurses' pay has reduced in real terms by between 10 and 20%. Is that fair?
Well, look, we have accepted we have an independent pay review body for people who work in
Well, you
health
ignored the
service,
pay review body when you
nurses.
instituted the pay freeze. You don't have to do what the pay review says.
Well, no, but the pay review body's made recommendations about rises,
which you've ignored in the past.
Which we've accepted in full, which means the nurse will get a £1,400 pay rise, which is targeted also at the lowest paid, which gives them a larger pay rise than other people. But you've got to balance that against whether it's widely affordable. The most important thing is that we get inflation under control. That's what's at the root of a lot of these issues. And that's why we've got to balance rewarding hard-working public servants, but also not having inflation-busting pay rises that will embed inflation.
Is it fair that MPs' wages have risen faster than starting salaries for police, teachers and nurses since the Conservatives have been in power?
We don't set MPs' pay, as you know.
That's an independent pay body, and they seem to have got that wrong.
As you know, MPs' pay is set by an independent body. We have nothing to do with setting it at all. You'll remember that change was made back in 2010. So MPs have nothing to do with setting their pay. It's an independent body.
It's not fair.
And they make the recommendations.
That independent pay body got it wrong. All I'm gently suggesting is that when it comes to nurses' pay, perhaps they've got this wrong.
Well, look, they take evidence both from the government but also from the trade unions. They look at recruitment and retention. They look at all of those things and they make recommendations, and we've accepted them. And I think most people will think that what's been offered is reasonable. It's in line with what people are getting in the private sector. I think most people listening to this will think they've had a reasonable pay offer, and I hope they accept it. We
will see what happens on that front. Just one last question, though. Telegraph and Times have been reporting that there has been a deal done with Albania which could speed up the process of getting people who should not be in this country back to where they came from. What can you tell us about that?
Well, look, I'm not going to comment on speculation in the newspapers, but look, the Prime Minister thinks that getting migration under control is incredibly important. He's been working closely with the Home Secretary on this, and when there are specific things to announce, we'll obviously announce them in due course.
I'll take that. Minister, good to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.